Obviously, today is thematically given over to the honoring of our mothers, and I want to do that through the message today as well. You know, it didn't occur to me until I went in and started looking at some material that today is the 100th anniversary of Mother's Day. 100th anniversary of Mother's Day here in America. But long before it became an American holiday, God had commanded us. At the time of the giving of the Ten Commandments, He had commanded us all, not just Americans, but everyone on the planet Earth, to honor their father and their mother, not just one day of the year as a holiday, but every day of the year, as just a way of honoring God and the way of honoring those that God has put over us. The fifth of the Ten Commandments, go ahead to the next slide, Nicholas. The fifth of the Ten Commandments says this: honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged. Because if you don't honor your mother, your days are not going to be prolonged. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Well, what does it mean? I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I suppose we could answer the question as to what does it mean to honor our mother. But the original Hebrew word that's translated into English as the word honor is a word that literally meant to make heavy. To make heavy. Now, I don't think that the intention of honoring our father and our mother was intended to make their hearts heavy. I don't think that was God's intention. But it was to convey to us that we are to not take them lightly. We're not to take their role and their influence, their job, and all the work that they do. We're not, really in effect, I think God is saying that our hearts should be heavy towards them. As we honor them and respect them and give the reverence that is due our parents. And there is no age limit on that. There's no graduation from that. I mean, that is for the rest of our lives. That we should respect and we should honor them as the authority that God has set over us, as the guardians of our young lives as we're growing up, but as the caretakers. I mean, my mom still takes care of me. I'm 55 years old, and I will honor her as I have done with my dad. I will honor her until the day I last see her and until I see her again. There is no doubt that motherhood is the highest of all callings. Think about it. It is really the most important ministry that I think that a human being can occupy. I'm often asked, are you the minister of the church? Well, we are all ministers, and those who are mothers are really, truly in the ministry. They are in the ministry of shaping young lives. Sometimes not so young. They're still shaping. While husbands and fathers are primarily given over to be the providers and the deciders within the context of the family, mothers are called to be the stewards and the shapers of our children. Are they not? Through the centuries and even to this present day, mothers spend more time shaping and influencing their children than dads do. It's just a fact. They do. In fact, one research study put out by the University of Michigan suggested that the average mother, and I think the qualifiers for this study was that they were talking about homes where both the mother and the father are present. Even in that kind of situation, the average mother spends 25% more time with their children than dads do. That puts them in a position where they have perhaps greater influence, greater impact in their lives. And as such, they're in a position of being the primary shapers of our society, the shapers of the next generation, and the molders of young minds and dreams. Mothers are the developers, in many ways, of personality. James Dobson made the comment one time that by the time a child reaches 6 years of age, their persona, their personality, their identity is pretty much put into place. And who spends the most of the time with the children by the time they're up, between birth and age 6? Well, it's the mother. So the mothers are they are the developers of our personalities in many ways. They're the molders of our vocabularies. They teach us what we should say and what we shouldn't say. They're the shapers of our attitudes. They represent both the soft voice of God, but they also represent the firmness of God, because if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. From our mothers, we learned about religion when she said things like, "You better pray that that stain comes out of that carpet." From her, we learned about logic when she said things like, "Because I said so, that's why." From her, we learned about foresight when she said things like, "Make sure that you wear clean underwear just in case you have an accident." From her, we learned about the circle of life when she said things like, "I brought you into this world, and I can take you out." From her, we learned about behavior modification when she said things like, "Stop acting like your father." From her, we learned things like, we learned how to appreciate what we have. When she said things like, "There are millions of children around the world who don't have the wonderful mother that you do." Honoring your mother ought to come easy. And for many of us, it does. But not for everyone. For some people, honoring your mother is a response that comes later on in life, especially when you have a mean mom. Like the mother Larry Christensen describes in his book, and he writes, he says, "I had the meanest mother on the planet. While other kids ate candy for breakfast, I had to have bacon, eggs, and toast. When others had ho-hos and ding-dongs for lunch, I had to eat a sandwich. And as you can guess, my supper wasn't really any different from was different rather than other kids ate. But at least I wasn't alone in my sufferings. My sister, my two brothers, they had the same mean mother. My mother insisted that she insisted upon knowing where we were at all times. You would think that we were part of some kind of chain gang. She had to know who we were with, where we were going to be at, what we were doing. She insisted that if we were going to be gone, if we said that we were going to be gone an hour, it didn't mean an hour in 1 minute. It meant an hour. And he says, "I'm nearly ashamed to admit it, but she actually struck us. Not once, but every time we had a mind to do our own thing. A mind of our own." He says, "That poor belt, my dad's, was used more on our behinds than it was to hold up his pants." Can you imagine someone actually hitting a child just because he disobeyed? So now you can see, he says, why I consider my mom one of the meanest mothers in the world. My mother demanded respect, and she expected us to be respectable. We had to wear clean and pressed clothes when we went to school, while other kids came to school with baggy pants or tight jeans. Why, oh why did we have to have the mother that we had who made us feel different from all these other kids? Even worse, we had to be in bed at 9 o'clock. I can remember those days. Even on weekends, we had to go to bed early because we had to get up early to go to church the next day. We couldn't sleep in like other kids did. So while they slept, my mother actually had the nerve to break the child labor law. She made us work. We had to do dishes. We had to make the bed. We had to learn how to cook. And we had to do all kinds of laborious things around the house. And Larry says, I believe that she laid awake late at night just thinking of mean things for us to do. She always insisted upon us telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, even if it killed us, and most of the times it nearly did. But the times we were teenagers, nothing got any better. She embarrassed us to no end by making our dates and our friends actually come to the door to get us. If I spent the night with a friend, can you imagine? She checked on me to see if I was actually there. I forgot to mention, he says, that while my friends were dating at the mature age of 12, my old-fashioned mother refused to let me date until I was 15 or 16. And then it was only to go to a school function. Through the years, things didn't get any better. We couldn't lie in bed sick like our other friends could in this school. If our friends had a stuffy nose or a bad pimple day or some other serious ailment, they could stay home from school. But not us. We had to have perfect attendance. In fact, we had perfect attendance almost every year, he says. Our marks in school had to be up to par. Nothing less than our best was acceptable. And so who do we blame for all of our pre-adult pre-adulthood stress and strain? Well, it's our mother. Who is it that we blame for how we turned out? We've never been arrested, never failed to have a job. We are responsible in all of our obligations, persistent in all of our commitments. Our marriages are healthy. Our children are respectful and responsible. We are training them the exact same way that we were trained by our mother. So who do we blame for the way that we turned out? We blame our mean mother, and God bless them. She expected us to grow up into God-fearing, truth-telling, educated, honest adults. And that's the way my mother was for me. I love my mom. Many years ago, there existed a Christian-based slide projector. This is really going back. A Christian-based slide projector series called Parables from Nature. How many of you have seen that or are familiar with that? Parables from Nature. I think it was put out by Standard Publishing. But the series was based upon the idea that there are certain life principles embedded in nature, in the way God designed and created nature. Some have attested that the creature that best illustrates motherhood is the stork. Out of all the creatures in the animal kingdom, storks are among the most loving. Not only do mother storks carefully nurture their young, but they even take care of the older storks along the way. When a stork becomes older and is unable to keep up with the other storks as they're flying, typically one of the stronger storks will fly up alongside of the weaker stork and allow the older stork's wings to rest upon the stronger stork. Storks are constantly touching one another, constantly nurturing and protecting one another. And because of their constant affection and touching and nurturing, the Greeks used the name given to storks to describe to be used as a word to describe family affection. It's the word storge. That's how it's pronounced in the Greek. But that's where we get the word stork from. They kind of go hand in hand. Most Christians are familiar with the other three primary Greek words associated with love. Phileo, brotherly love. Eros, romantic love. Agape, unconditional love. But it's this fourth word that best describes the love of a mom. Because mothers are the primary nurturers and caregivers, dispensers of affectionate love. It's the mother who carries the baby in the womb, imparting warmth and security and trust. She then births the child from her own body and feeds the child from her own body and tenderly nurtures that child. Your first impressions of love came from your mother. During the 9 months spent in the womb and then the first 2 years of life, it's the mother who gives who is the most important figure for modeling affectionate love. David acknowledges this in his words from not the 23rd Psalm, but the Psalm just before that, the 22nd Psalm, when David writes, "Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb you have been my God." And David here is saying, God, I learned how to trust in you by trusting in my mother, in my own mom. She laid the foundation for my relationship with you, and she laid the foundation for my relationship with other people. She's the one who gave me that storge, that stork, nurturing love. In fact, without a mother storge love, children may grow up with a confused understanding of affection. They may grow up with an inherent fear of relationships. According to author Jack Frost, believe it or not, there's a guy out there, his name is Jack Frost, and he's written a book about this kind of love called storge love. He says that storge love is really demonstrated in three primary ways. I want to share this with you. Number one, storge love is demonstrated through affectionate touch. Affectionate touch. Would you say that with me? Affectionate touch. Listen, we were created for affection. And inside your mind, you're saying, you know what, you're right. I really like that. I like affection. Doctors have scientifically proven that without physical touch, the body and the emotions, they just don't work right. They become unhealthy. Touching someone says to them that they are important to you. Touching someone conveys a sense of worth upon that individual. Whenever a blessing was conveyed or conferred upon someone throughout the Bible, from the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, all the way through, whenever a blessing was conferred, it was always conferred through the laying on of hands. It was always conveyed through the physical touch. The truth is that if we don't receive affectionate touch in the right kind of way as a child, then we may look for it in the wrong kinds of ways as an adult, because we were designed for affection. And we need it. And we're going to have it one way or the other. And so affectionate touch is really important. The second way that storge love is communicated is through eye contact. I want you to think about your eye contact. You know, babies and infants can't understand language, but they can interpret your eyes. Even as children growing up, we can see our worth conveyed through our mother's eyes and how she looks at us. I mean, the way that our parents look at us, even if they don't say a word, they can either lighten our load, or our mother's look can break your back. All it takes is a certain eye contact, a certain look. And the same is true within the context of our own adult relationships. The truth is that if you don't make eye contact, if your eye contact doesn't convey care and compassion and concern, it doesn't matter what you say, because the windows, as you know, are the window to the soul. The eye is the window to the soul. And so no matter what you say, your eyes may convey something completely different. So eye contact is important. And the third way that we convey storge love is through the tone of our voice. The tone of our voice. Babies and infants may not understand words, but they can sure interpret the tone of your voice. Most often, what we communicate isn't so much bound in what we say, but in how we say it. And that's particularly true for babies and toddlers. I work with about 50 women, have done so for now about 15 years. And every once in a while, one of them will get pregnant. And as soon as the baby has been cleared, they're at the school. The mothers will bring the babies in, and all of a sudden it would be kind of just like a mushroom cloud of women that would just kind of converge upon that baby. And one of the first things that they want to do is to bring the baby, and when the baby is brought into the room, all the women, they just kind of rush and they turn into mush and they start speaking in tongues. They start saying things that are just not understandable, like goo goo gaga. And of course, I don't understand a word that they're saying, but the baby does. The baby understands. And representing all men, I walk over and say, "Yep, it sure looks like a baby." And all of a sudden, I get this look from the women in the room. And, honestly, I don't think most men have it in them to be touchy and feely and ooey cooey cuddly. I just don't think that most men have it. But women do. They instinctively do. And I think that's by God's design. Now, I want to encourage you to open you probably think, well, Mike's not even going to ask us to open our Bibles today. Well, open your Bibles. I want you to turn to the book of Genesis, chapter 1. Chapter 1. And we're going to look at 2 verses. Genesis chapter 1. And I want you to look at these 2 verses in light of God's admonition to honor mothers. Beginning with verse 26. God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now I want to ask you a question. How could God have created a female in His image if there is not some aspect of, in terms of His nature and character, that is feminine? Think about it. How could God have created Eve in His image if there is not some aspect of His nature and character that is feminine? I believe that what's implied here is that within the very nature of God, that there exists a mother's heart. The storge love that nurtures and comforts, that's there in His heart. That's a nature that's oftentimes associated with mothers more than fathers. Now, there are those who obviously have taken this to an extreme to suggest that God is as feminine as He is masculine. In fact, one Bible translation that came out in 1995, entitled The New Testament in Psalms, an inclusive version, changes the Lord's Prayer to say, "Our Father, Mother, who art in heaven." And there have been other translations that have tried to do this gender-neutral thing. But throughout the Bible, God is described with masculine pronouns and in masculine terms as our Father. Period. So I'm not suggesting that we need to feminize God in any way. That would be an extreme. But it would also be an extreme to suggest that God is absent of any feminine qualities. In fact, God even uses the feminine to describe His own quality of compassion. Look at what it says in Isaiah chapter 66. As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you, and you will be comforted over Jerusalem. The truth is that God created Eve in His image just as much as He created Adam in His image. The Bible says that it wasn't good for Adam to be alone, in part because Adam wasn't complete in and of himself. In fact, neither male nor female can be complete in and of themselves. And I think that is by God's design, that we need something beyond ourselves, something more. Now, I know that there are exceptions to the generalizations that we often make about men and women. But typically, masculine hearts cry out to do things. Men are doers. More than just thinkers and feelers and relators. Men are doers. They like to do things. They like to form and work and shape the creation. They like to be the providers. They want to accomplish things and provide. They like to rationalize and intellectualize. They like doing those kinds of things. The feminine heart typically seeks to connect, relationally connect. They like to communicate. There's been some scientific studies that have been done that, well, maybe I shouldn't even say, about the number of words that women like to use versus men. But women do. Women like to talk more than men. In fact, it's at least 25% more than men. Women like to they like to connect. They like to bond. They like to know others, and they like to be known. They like to build relationships. And so the power to receive and to nurture typically lies with women, and the power to give and provide typically is associated with men. When you look at the sexual design, God's sexual design for men and women, you can easily see that men are the givers and women are the receivers. But we need to be careful about stereotyping the primary natures of men and women. And this in no way infers any kind of endorsement of homosexuality. Just because some men might tend to be a little bit more on the relational feeling side, that does not infer homosexuality. Because even while men are predominantly concerned, stereotypically concerned with doing things and providing and directing and taking leadership. At the same time, they have been created in the image of God, and because they've been created in His image, they are also endowed with some feminine qualities. And so men by default will have some feminine qualities within their nature. If He created even His image, then would He not also have some of those same character traits associated with some men? And when these qualities are rejected, then men will deny their ability to express compassion and tenderness and affection and intimacy in the way God has designed for men to be able to do. And when they do that, they deny a portion of who God has created them to be. When a man denies those elements, he runs, this is so important. When he denies those elements, he runs the risk of not being tenderhearted and affectionate towards his wife and towards his children the way God intended for him to be. If he's just going to be macho all the time, folks, that is not God's design. There are times when the man has got to be tenderhearted and affectionate. Being created in God's image also implies that the women possess a certain percentage of God's masculine qualities within them. And if they deny those masculine qualities, then they'll end up being just nothing but just driven by emotions and relationships and feelings all the time. No, that's not necessarily always the best thing either. And so there are some other elements that God has added to the mixture of women. Listen, Jesus wasn't just some stoic, emotionless man. Some stoic, macho man concerned with just doing things and accomplishing things and intellectual pursuits and providing for people's needs. That does not describe the totality of Jesus. He was also concerned about expressing compassion for the needy. He was also concerned about being tender-hearted towards the children. When all the other Jewish men would have nothing to do with children and women, Jesus was the one who stood out and said, "Let them come to me." Jesus represents the best of both worlds. He was fully masculine. He was a man's man. But at the same time, he was tender-hearted and compassionate even towards little children. He would have taken nursery duty today. But most men are too macho to do that. But Jesus would have. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, even Jesus would enjoy sitting down at a well and having a conversation with a woman. He would enjoy going to the house of Mary and Martha and having conversations with women. But at the same time, he could also garner the respect of the toughest of the Roman centurions. And he could be the best fisherman that there was on the planet and fill a boat with fish. Jesus was the masculine man, but Jesus was also a tender-hearted man. Jesus had all the masculine macho qualities, but he also had some of the storge qualities of tenderness and affection and compassion and mercy and tender, all of that. He had all of it. Do you remember what Jesus said to Martha, who was busy working for the Lord, while Mary, her sister, was talking to Jesus? Listen, look at the scripture. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care?" That's a real nice thing to say to the Lord, wasn't it? "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself?" And then Martha decides that she's going to command the Lord. Interesting. "Tell her to help me." And I'm sure Jesus has got to be thinking, wow, 3 years I've been with you and this is what I get? Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about a great many things. But only one thing is really needed here. Mary has chosen what is best, what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Now I want to ask you a question, looking at this passage. Which would you consider to be the more masculine role here? The more masculine role. Mary's works, or Martha's works, or Mary's talk? which one would be the more masculine of the two? Martha's works. Because like most men, she was concerned with accomplishing things, doing things with her hands. Mary, on the other hand, was more concerned with the intimacy of talking, conversation. Now, of those two traits, which did Jesus prefer? You see, Jesus not only wanted to accomplish things, but He also wanted to connect with people. He wanted to connect. He wanted to bond. He wanted to relate. He wasn't only concerned with directing people into the truth, but He was even more concerned with offering mercy and tenderness and compassion towards people. Look at what Jesus said to the Pharisees, who He was not particularly tender towards. But look at what He said to the Pharisees, because they were so untender. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness." Do you see? The Pharisees were only concerned about works. Works. And Jesus says, you've missed the point. You've missed the relational point in all of this. Have you ever noticed how really every religion and every culture throughout the ages, except for Christianity, has valued men over women? And masculinity over femininity. Have you noticed that all man-made religions are based upon a system of doing good works in order to merit a relationship with God? Good works to gain God's favor. Which implies which of the two stereotypes? The more masculine or the more feminine? The more masculine. It's a religion designed for men. Therefore, it's going to be more masculine. And so, the religions of the world are based upon this masculine role, this masculine identity, and favoring that over the feminine, rather than being based upon building caring, intimate relationships, which is more what nature? The masculine or the feminine? The feminine. But it seems that God values intimacy with us more than just good works from us. Listen, when you have intimacy with the Almighty, the good works will flow not out of a sense of duty and obligation, but out of a sense of love and gratitude. Isn't that what it's all about? And it is mothers who typically cultivate that kind of influence, that kind of attitude, who cultivate within their children the ability to give and receive intimacy and affection and compassion more so than fathers. Not to say that fathers can't, not to say that fathers don't, but it's the mothers who primarily do that within the first 6 years of life and probably beyond. So let's give credit where credit is due. But listen, you can't give away what you don't possess. For some people, even for Christians, giving and receiving affection, affectionate love, that is not an easy thing for some people, because maybe they have never received it during their growing up years. And when you don't receive a healthy amount of affectionate love, you're going to tend to be a little bit more hard-hearted. If you're not going to get soft, affectionate love, you're probably going to tend to be a little bit more on the hard-hearted side. Or you may have the tendency to express love more through works and that kind of thing. Rather than words, you're going to express your love through actions. Rather than through affectionate touch, you might express your love through gifts and services. Listen, the truth is that you can love someone with unconditional love, but just loving someone with unconditional love doesn't necessarily mean that you are able to show them affectionate love. My dad loved me. But I never heard the words, "I love you," until I was probably in my 40s. The idea of a man putting his arm around, his son's, that just didn't happen when I was growing up. I mean, my dad was a man's man. And his dad was a man's man. My grandpa, my dad's dad, when he was, I'm just kind of bragging on my grandpa a little bit, but when he was 93 years old, I kid you not, he was up on the side of a hill that would be hard for most of us to even climb. He was up there with a sickle, whacking the weeds. My grandpa was a provider. In fact, he had the reputation of he was a coal miner, and he had the reputation in Morgan County, Kentucky, that he was able to fill coal cars, train cars up with coal faster than anybody else. He was a man's man. And I know he loved his family because he worked even with a broken back to try to provide for their needs. But he could not be affectionate. He could not put his arm around. He could not say the words, "I love you." I don't think he ever said the words, "I'm sorry." He did not show that kind of vulnerability. Men didn't do that back then. And so that's what I grew up with, because my dad couldn't do that. My dad was a Marine. He finished up at Parris Island, and he went off and he did his Marine thing. And my dad was a pretty tough guy. You know, I won't say that he flipped the quarters on my bed growing up, but they had to be made right. But my dad had a hard time showing affection and love because his dad had a hard time showing affection and love. And I guarantee you my great-great-great-great-grandparents had a hard time showing affection and love. Listen, if you've never received it, it's hard for you to give it away. If you don't have it, you can't give it away. But I believe that we were created with an inherent, God-designed need for affectionate love. And if we don't receive it in one form, we will look for it in another form, and sometimes in darker ways. That's why it is so important that we give and receive affectionate love. That affectionate love be expressed in the context of healthy family relationships. Even church ought to be a place where we express affectionate love towards one another. That's why our greeting time, when we have our greeting time in the morning, that's so important. Because that may be the only time that you receive any kind of affectionate touch all week long. It's so important that we do that. One of the things I most appreciate about Tim and his dad, Lindsay, was that before the service began, they would give one another a kiss on the cheek. And at the end of the service, when they said goodbye to one another, they would give each other a kiss on the cheek. I thought they were Italian for a long time. Or maybe Middle Eastern, I wasn't sure. But affectionate touch, important. But if you've never received that, you may not feel comfortable receiving it even now or giving it away. You may not even have it in you to do that. But let me tell you about someone who can and who does. I read it earlier. I'm going to read it again. Jesus said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen," and that would be the feminine, "as the mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing." You see, as a mother wants to gather her children to herself and nurture them, that's the way God is towards us. That's why I know that He has those qualities. He has that storge love quality about Him. 700 years before Christ, the nation of Israel had lost its love for God. It had become cold-hearted because it thought of God basically as a list of do's and don'ts. And being filled with a sinful nature, they were ready to do whatever God had said not to do. And they abandoned Him. But God never abandoned His love for them. Listen to what God says about Himself. From Isaiah chapter 49. God, in referring to Himself, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands." Same author, same book, Isaiah 66. "As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you, and you will be comforted over Jerusalem." You see, God doesn't just have a picture of you in His wallet. He has you engraved in the palms of His hands. Whenever He looks at the nail-scarred hands, and I believe that when we go to heaven, we're going to see the nail-scarred hands. Whenever he looks at the nail-scarred hands, who's he thinking of? He's thinking of you. He sees you in the nail-scarred hands because of his great love for you. A love that is always saying, come home. I want to be with you. Let me embrace you as a mother embraces her children and needs a little of mama's love. Listen, I'm going to close with this, but please remember these words. I'm glad that God isn't just an intellectual God. That He isn't just the all-knowing. I'm glad that God isn't just an all-powerful God. An all-knowing God. I'm glad that God is also an all-affectionate God. Filled with mercy and tenderness and compassion for His children. Aren't you glad that God isn't just this macho God sitting up wherever and just intellectually and about our situation? No, He has a compassionate heart towards us. He has a storge heart towards us. Because He's tender. Jesus said, all you who are weary and heavy laden, come to me and I will give you rest. For I am tender, soft-hearted towards you. And all we have to do is to come. He already loves us. He cares about us. That's the kind of God that we serve. Tender. Jesus, absolutely macho man. Jesus, yes. But Jesus, tender-hearted too. Both in the same person. Isn't that good to know? Isn't that good to know? We live in a world where we are having religious wars all over the world. In India, the Middle East, over religions that are primarily masculine in nature. Christianity is different. Christianity created male and female, both in His image, and He loves us both the same. He is a good God. We have a great message to share with the world. Let's pray. Lord God in heaven, thank you so much for maintaining the character and nature of who you are and imparting that to us. When we live out the nature that you've given to us, God, we can be strong and soft at the same time. We can be focused on the intellectual pursuits and still at the same time feel deeply a tender-hearted love towards others. Help us to not, God, be so focused one way or the other that we forget that in you that there is perfect balance to all of that. Thank you, Lord God, for giving us your nature in the Spirit of Christ. And it's in His name we do pray.